Right, so May, June 2017. Question 1. Use the following goods market model to illustrate and explain using a chain of events. All words how taxation can be used during an economic recession to increase the level of output and income to reach the full employment level. Clearly indicate any shift and or movement on the diagram. Right, so if there is an economic recession, we obviously want to boost economic activity, right? We want to increase it. So two ways that we can do that: we can either increase government expenditure or decrease tax. Okay, so they've obviously asked us to use a decrease in taxation in this case. All right. Now remember, a decrease in tax increases the demand for goods and services. All right. So in this case, we've got a decrease in the change in taxation, and therefore your demand for goods increases. Rather put an increase here and just say taxes have decreased. Alright, so what is your chain of events? If taxes are decreased, it means that your disposable income has increased, and therefore if disposable income increases, consumption for goods and services increases the demand for goods and services, and therefore your output and income. All right. So we don't necessarily have to reach the full employment level, YF, but we're just indicating that we would at least move towards the full employment, unless they specify in your exam that you need to reach the full employment level of output and income. Okay. It doesn't have to be tax, it can be government expenditure, it can be investments, autonomous consumption. Those would all shift the curve. It could be a change in your tax rates. That's when you pivot the curve. It could be a change in your MPC, pivot the curve. Change in your MPI, marginal propensity to import, we pivot the curve. All right. Cool. Use the following diagram to explain why a decrease in the money supply will lead to an increase in the equilibrium interest rates. All right, so this is your money market chain of events. All right, so money supply is exogenous. Right, determined outside of the model. And in this case, obviously, you can see that a decrease in the money supply decreases real money, increases your interest rates. Okay? But how does it actually work? So, as your money supply decreases, your demand for bonds decreases, price of bonds decrease, interest rate increases. Inverse relationship between your price of bonds and your interest rates. Okay. The SARB sells bonds price decreases and your interest rate increases. Define the LM curve. Define the LM curve. All right, so your LM curve, liquidity money, shows combinations of income and interest rates. Where MD is equal to MS. Now, in your money market or your financial market, the point of equilibrium is where your money demand curve intersects your money supply curve. There is equilibrium in your money market, okay? Now, we derive our LM curve from our money market, and you need to remember that every single point along your LM curve, the money market is in equilibrium, okay? And in your IS curve, we use the goods market to derive the IS curve. For every single point along the IS curve, the goods market is in equilibrium. All right. Define the AD curve. Now, the ADAS model, aggregate demand and aggregate supply model, the AD curve shows total quantity of goods and services demanded at different price levels. So in exactly the same way as the demand curve shows the different quantities of goods and services demanded at different prices, your aggregate demand curve is simply accumulation or market demand. All right. So that's why we say price level within the economy. All right. Question 2.2. Illustrate by using 3 different diagrams below and explain using a chain of events the difference between the impact of a contractionary fiscal policy in the following model. So, in the first one, we've got our goods market model. If we run a contractionary fiscal policy in the goods market model, we shift the demand for goods curve downwards. There is a decrease in equilibrium output and income. In our ISLM model, on your axes, we've got interest rate and output and income. Restrictive fiscal policy shifts the IS curve. Now you need to remember in your ISLM model, when you shift your IS curve, you have 3 points that you need to mention, okay? You've got point A, you've got point B, which is a disequilibrium point, and you've got point C, which is your new equilibrium point. And in your ADAS model, remember your fiscal policy shifts your AD curve. Right. Now in your ADAS graph, you don't have to shift your AS curve back to the equilibrium because they've only asked you for the change in your fiscal policy. Right. Okay, so the chain of events in your goods market, it could either be an increase in tax or a decrease in government expenditure. That could give you your restrictive fiscal policy. Taxes increase, well, let's start with government expenditure. Decreases, demand decreases, output and income decreases. Taxes increase, your disposable income decreases, consumption decreases, demand decreases, output and income decreases. Now for your ISLM curve, you're going to have to use both sides of the economy to explain the movements, right? So in your ISLM model, right, so your ISLM, now obviously your fiscal policy is your goods market. So you start with your goods market, right? Goods market model, increase in taxation or a decrease in government expenditure. We decrease the disposable income, consumption, output decreases. Okay? That is when you've got your decrease shown between Y0 and Y1. Right. So if you look at your graph here, we've explained why we went from Y0 to Y1. Okay? But we also need to explain why there's a decrease in the interest rates. Okay? So in that case, we've got to use our financial markets. The decrease in output and income decreases the demand for money. We would shift the money demand curve to the left, and as we did that, there would be a decrease in the interest rates. Now, back to the goods market. As we decrease the interest rates, investment spending increases, demand for goods and services increase, output and income increases, and we go from Y1 to Y2. So we've explained now why interest rate has decreased from I0 to I1, and we've explained why Y0 went from back to why the output and income went from Y0, Y1, and Y2. Okay. Makes sense. For your ADAS graph, you're going to have to include your fiscal policy, your monetary policy, and the labor market, because it's the labor market that explains the change in prices. Okay. You cannot use your goods and financial market to explain the change in prices. You always have to use the labor market to do that. But you always start with whatever market you are using the policy variable. So, because they've told us that it's a fiscal policy, Fiscal policy, government expenditure decreased or taxation increased. AD curve shifts from AD to AD1. All right, now, how does it do that? It is because of our goods market decreasing government expenditure, decreases the demand for goods and services, output and income decreases. All right. So, why has the demand for goods and services decreased from Y0 to Y1? Output and income has decreased in our goods market. But we haven't explained what happens to price. So, how does the decrease in output and income affect the labor market? It affects it through the financial market. So, in the financial market, the decrease in output and income would decrease your demand for money, increasing your, decreasing your interest rates, now in your labor market, a decrease in output and income decreases your employment, increases your unemployment, bargaining power of workers decreases. They can only bargain for lower nominal wages. Firms will pay them lower nominal wages, and they are therefore able to decrease the prices of their goods and services. They've told us here that it's the short run, okay? If, on the other hand, they had said long run, you would have carried on past this point. So for this question, this is where you stop here, okay? If they had asked you to continue into the medium run or long run, you would have started in the labor market. Remember, prices have decreased, so that adjusts your workers' price expectations, okay? Price expectations decrease, which means that they bargain for lower nominal wages, and that decreases prices. Then you go back to your financial and goods market with a decrease in price. Real money increases. Interest rates would decrease. Investment spending increase. Demand for goods and services increase. Output and income increases. Now remember, in your ADAS graph, you would have shifted your aggregate supply curve in this case. And it's always in the opposite direction to your aggregate demand curve. You return the economy towards to the natural rate of output and income. Okay. But again, don't get confused. You would have stopped here for this question because it said short run. All right. All right. Given the following information, domestic interest rate 3%, interest rate in the US 5%. If you expected the rand dollar exchange rate to appreciate by 5%, now obviously the difference between the two is only 2, right? In a year's time, should you buy South African bonds or US bonds? Okay? So, if you buy South African bonds, the return in South Africa is 3%. If you buy US bonds, All right? You're getting 5%. But what they've told us is that the rand will appreciate by 5%. So when you convert your dollars back into rands, you are losing 5%. Therefore, you invest in South Africa. Right. Question B. If you expected the rand-dollar exchange rate to depreciate by 1%, what should you do? Again, your South African return is 3%. In the US, you would have got 5%. And then when you converted your dollars back into rands, the rand has depreciated by 1%. So you would actually make an extra percentage in that case. And you would invest in the US. All right. Now, question 3. Given the following diagrams on the next pages, given the equilibrium level of output and income in the goods market, there is a corresponding trade balance position in the different diagrams. So in diagram A, we can see that at the point of equilibrium, we've got Y0 on your 0 point of your net exports curve. Okay? So when that happens, exports are equal to imports. So if exports are equal to imports, you've got trade balance. Diagram B. So remember, this is the positive section of your net exports curve. That's 0, and that is the negative. And we can see that at equilibrium, we are sitting in the negative. So, exactly, trade deficit. Diagram C, we're sitting at a positive level. Where do we intersect the net exports curve? At a positive. Trade surplus. Right, question B. Use diagram A and illustrate an increase in exports on the level of output and income and the trade balance. All right, so use diagram A to illustrate an increase in exports on the level of output and income and the trade balance. Clearly indicate any shift of or movement along the diagram without changing the equilibrium position. Okay, so it always boils down to a change in local demand or change in foreign demand. Okay, change in local demand, we move along the curve. Right, so in this case, illustrate an increase in exports. Is that our demand or foreign demand? It's foreign demand for our goods and services. So if you had to draw an increase in exports on your goods market model, shift the demand for goods curve upwards by the change in exports. We obviously have to produce these additional exports, so that will cause us to increase our output and income from Y0 to Y1. Okay? You extend the dotted line down to your net exports curve. Okay? But we know that this is a change in exports, so we're going to shift the curve. But what they did here, clearly indicate the shift of or the movement along the diagram. We know we're going to shift the curve. without changing the equilibrium position and the trade balance position. Okay, so we need to shift the net exports curve to that point there where we are still at a trade balance. Okay. Remember, you're on a trade balance when you are on the zero line. If, on the other hand, now don't draw this, I'm just showing you. If, on the other hand, they said the new point of equilibrium corresponded to a trade surplus, then you would have shifted the curve like that. And that would have occurred at a trade surplus. Okay, does that make sense? Or they could have obviously said shifted to a trade deficit, and you would have shifted it over here, and you would have still had a trade deficit. Okay. In this case, obviously, they wanted the trade balance. Increase in exports, you always shift to the right. Decrease in exports should shift to the left. It's just how much you would shift it to the right. Okay. So at that point there, trade balance. If they had asked you to show it at a trade surplus, then you would have taken this line and you would have shifted it a little bit further. So it just moves parallel, but you would have seen that intersection would be at a trade surplus. Or if it was at a trade deficit, you would have not shifted it so much, and then this would have intersected in the negative. Okay. You guys cool with that? Right. Use diagram B to illustrate a depreciation of the exchange rate on the level of output and income and the trade balance. Clearly indicates any shift of blah, 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 same thing, without changing the equilibrium position and the trade balance. Okay. What we can see here is that it is a trade deficit. Okay. If the rand depreciates against the dollar, the rand price of our exports are not going to change, but the dollar price is going to decrease. So it is still an increase in foreign demand. We shift the demand for goods curve upwards. Right? So our new output and income is at Y1, Y1, but it is still a shift of the net exports curve to the right, and as we can see, we are still at a trade deficit or in the negative. All right. Any questions? All right, and finally, use the diagram C to illustrate the decrease in government expenditure on the level of output and income and the trade balance. Blah, 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 all the same. So, if the government were to decrease government expenditure, what would that do to the demand for goods curve? It would decrease it. It would shift it downwards. What would that do? We would have a new output and income level at Y1. Now, because it is a decrease in government expenditure and it decreases the local demand for goods and services, we do not shift the net exports curve. So what have we done? We did intersect at a certain level. Now what we've done is we've intersected at a higher level, so the net exports has improved. Now, why would that have happened? Because when we've decreased our local demand, okay, imports are decreasing. Our income is decreased, therefore we buy less goods and services, we import less goods and services. But exports are determined by foreign income, not by our income. So exports have not changed. Okay. So your equation for net exports is equal to exports minus imports. And if only imports are decreasing, means that term is increasing, net exports are improving. Right. Okay, so for question 4, draw an ISLM model for an open economy. As soon as you see ISLM for an open economy, you know you got your two graphs. You've got your ISLM and you've got your interest parity relation that you need to draw. Okay. Indicate what will happen to the nominal exchange rate if a contractionary monetary policy is applied. Explain the impact of this policy on the level of output and income and on the trade balance by using words of a chain of events or a chain of events. So, your ISLM for an open economy now in your interest parity relation, you've got interest rate on your y-axis and you've got your nominal exchange rate on your x-axis. Okay? So, what they've said here is, what will happen to the nominal exchange rate if a contractionary monetary policy is applied? So remember, monetary policy, we look at our financial market. Okay? What do we derive from our financial market? We derive the LM curve from our financial market. So we know we're going to shift the LM curve. Which way are we going to shift it? Contractionary monetary policy to the left. Okay? So that's exactly what's going to happen here. LM curve to the left. Now, what has happened there? At our new point of equilibrium, we can see that there is lower output and income. There is higher interest rates. And the higher interest rate corresponds to a nominal appreciation. Okay. So obviously you're going to have to explain all three of these movements, but it's not necessarily straightforward. You might have to include more than one market to explain those movements. So because it's a monetary policy change, we're going to start in our financial market. In our financial market, restrictive monetary policy means the money supply decreases, which decreases real money and increases the interest rate. So we've just explained this. In our goods market, because interest rate has increased, the link between the goods and financial market, investment, negative relationship of interest rate and investment spending decreases. In our goods market, we would shift the demand for goods curve downwards. There would be a decrease in our demand and therefore a decrease in our output and income. In our interest parity relation, an increase in interest rates, as we can see, straightforward linkage between them, increases the, or actually rather say, capital inflow, because the return on South African investment is now higher relative to the rest of the world, which causes an appreciation of our exchange rates. Now, you could have stopped there, but at the end of the question, they said, explain the impact of this policy on the level of output and income and on the trade balance. So in order to explain the effect on the trade balance, what does an appreciation of our currency do? It makes our exports more expensive in foreign currency terms. So because the rand has appreciated, exports are going to decrease, imports will increase, net exports or trade balance deteriorates. And now you've explained all those movements as well as the movement on our trade balance. All right, question 5. Intersection between the price setting and wage setting curves is called the natural rate of unemployment. Define the natural rate of unemployment. So in classical economics, we assume that the natural rate of unemployment would be 0. We assume that the economy would always tend to an equilibrium level where everybody was employed. Right? When we looked at Unit 8 and we spoke about bargaining power, we saw that that was not necessarily the case. Okay? Why? Because as employment increases, bargaining power increases, driving up the demand for higher nominal wages. Firms pay higher nominal wages, but they can only pay higher nominal wages up to a point. Okay? Eventually it becomes too expensive to employ labor, and at the same time they can't simply drive up their prices past a certain point. The demand for their product will decrease, they won't sell anything. Remember, we said prices are calculated as a markup over the labor cost. Okay? So what will happen is they will not hire as many people, right? Or they will lay off a bunch of workers. So the economy will always tend to sort of be in an equilibrium at below the full employment rate. Okay. So where is the equilibrium point in our labor market if it is not at the full employment rate? Okay. So the natural rate of unemployment is the rate of unemployment such that the targeted real wage implied by wage setting is equal to the real wage implied by price setting. Straightforward definition. You can remember that. Remember, the real wage is set as the interaction between nominal wages and price level. Nominal wages are determined by workers, price level is determined by firms. So it's at the intersection or at the point of equilibrium that we get our equilibrium rate of unemployment and our wage rate and price level. Name one wage setting factor and one price setting factor that will cause a decrease in the natural rate of unemployment. Clearly indicate the change of the direction in the factor. Okay, so you need to know what would shift either of these curves and what would cause a movement along either of these curves. Okay, so for your wage setting, it is any factor other than unemployment rates so remember your catch-all variable, a minimum wage, labor laws, unions. If any of those increase, Oh, sorry, hang on. No. Cause a decrease in the natural rate of unemployment. So those would have to decrease. If the bargaining power of labor decreases, you shift the wage setting curve to the left. If the bargaining power of labor increases, you shift it to the right. Okay. Then for your price setting, if your markup decreases, the price setting curve shifts upwards. Unemployment decreases. Right. So if we had to show those on the graph, it would be a shift to the left of the wage setting curve, and a decrease in the markup. Now, why we say a decrease in the markup shifts the price setting curve upwards is because it is calculated as 1 over 1 plus the markup. Right. Any questions on that? All right, then in question 5, use the ADAS model to explain the impact of an expansionary monetary policy in the medium run. Okay? So now what did they ask for? They asked for just the medium run. Okay? So what is that? In the short run, an expansionary monetary policy shifted the AD curve to the right. Okay? Which means in the long run, in order to return the economy towards the equilibrium level, the AS curve would have had to shift to the left. Right, and the AS shift is the medium run. So what they're saying here is you only have to mention the medium run and therefore the AS curve. Okay. So remember, we would start in the monetary policy, we would have started with financial market, goods market, labor market. But that's in the short run. Then in the medium run, they only want the labor market and then the financial and goods market. So on the expected price level, real money supply, interest rates, all of those different variables. Okay, so firstly, the explanation on the expected price level. All right, now in the labor market, when we would have stopped at this point over here, right, at that intermediate equilibrium point, we can see that it is definitely higher than the initial price level. Okay, remember, prices increase and then workers change their price expectations. So price expected at that point would be higher. They expect prices to be higher, so what are they going to do? Bargain for higher nominal wages. And remember, the self-fulfilling prophecy, prices will increase. All right. Now, Real money supply in your financial market if prices increase, real money supply decreases. Also in your financial market, if prices have increased, real money has decreased, it means that interest rates will increase. And your investment spending, this would obviously be now. If your interest rate has increased, okay, now we use this part of the model, the goods market part of the model, to explain why there would be a decrease in the output and income. Okay? Increase in interest rates decreases your investment spending, decreases demand, and decreases output and income. You can stop at this point over here because they're only asking for the effect on interest rates. Okay. But that chain of events is used in your goods market chain of events. Right. Which one of the following statements are correct regarding the GDP? Now remember, GDP is the total value of production within the borders of our country for a given year. Okay? So it would be in this case A, C, and E. Option 4. Number 2, induced consumption. Now remember, consumption is divided into autonomous and induced. Autonomous consumption does not depend on income. Induced consumption does depend on income. Positively related to your income. Okay? That would be B, C, and D. Right. Number 3. Which one of the following statements are correct regarding the marginal propensity to consume? So your MPC determines the slope of your demand curve in your goods market model, right? If your MPC increases, the slope of the curve steepens. Okay, we increase the slope of the curve, which would obviously correspond to a higher level of output and income. Right. Your MPC does affect the size of the multiplier. Why? Because we calculate the multiplier as 1 over 1 minus C. And remember, C is MPC. So it definitely has an effect on your multiplier. Right. In this case, your answer would be option 1, all of the above. All right. Question 4. Given the following information, calculate the full employment level of output and income, or rather calculate the current level of output and income, and then what would government need to do in order to reach the full employment level of output and income. All right, so it's always pretty much a straightforward question. Start with your multiplier. There's your MPC. So your multiplier is 1 over 1 minus 0.8, which means your multiplier is equal to 5. Right? To calculate your equilibrium level of income, multiplier times your autonomous variables. So, autonomous consumption is 100, plus investment 250, plus government expenditure 400, minus your taxation, but again, you need to multiply it by your MPC. All right? So if you solve that, 5 times 670, and you should get an answer of 3350. All right, so that's your current level of output and income. All right, but what they're asking you is what would government need to do in order to reach the full employment level of output and income, which they've told us is 7350. Okay? So, your full employment level, YF, minus your equilibrium level is equal to the change in government expenditure. All right? Now, 7350 minus the 3350 gives us an answer of 4,000. But now, if government expenditure had to change by 4,000, the multiplier process would take over after they've spent the 4,000. So they would spend 4,000, we would reach the full employment level of output and income, and then the multiplier would take off from that point. Okay, so it would actually push our economy past the full employment level of output and income. So what we need to do is divide that by the multiplier, and we get an answer of 800. So now what happens is government expenditure changes by 800, okay? And after they've increased their expenditure by 800, the multiplier takes over, and the final impact on our economy is the 4,000 which we need to reach the full employment level of output and income. All right. Always the same method in these calculations. Solve for your current, subtract it from your full employment, divide it by your multiplier, and that's what you get, or that's your answer for the change. All right. Makes sense. Okay, question 5. Now what's happened here is government expenditure has increased, taxation has increased. We shift the curve downwards. But you can see that there is a slight increase overall in our output and income. Okay? Now this is your balanced budget multiplier, right? Where we say that a balanced budget, increase in government expenditure of 400, increase in taxes of 400, will still have an expansionary effect. Okay? So, to calculate your multiplier in this case, it is the slope of the curve. So we can see that the slope of the curve is 0.75, which means that our MPC is equal to 0.75. To calculate your multiplier, 1 over 1 minus 0.75, which gives us a multiplier of 4. Right, so the multiplier is not 5. If government spending increases by 100, equilibrium level of output and income will be 900. Okay? If government expenditure changes by 100, the multiplier will take over, and the difference in our output and income will be 100 by the multiplier, which would be 400, which would mean that this is 800. So that's also not correct. Increase in taxes by 100. CT will be 75. That is correct. Why? 0.75 multiplied by your change in taxation. And the equilibrium level of output and income will be 500 at point B. So to calculate your change in equilibrium level of income when you've got a change in tax, it is equal to the change in tax multiplied by the multiplier multiplied by the MPC. Which will give you an answer of 300. No. So it's obviously not that option. Right, and I can tell you that option D and E are correct. So it would be D and E. Okay. Popular question, so you need to know how to calculate those changes. Right. Question 6. The relationship between the level of output and income and the demand for money is what? In our financial markets, when we increase the income, we increase the demand for money. So we know that it is a positive relationship. And we would shift the curve to the right. Question 7. In our money market, which of the following is correct? It would be option 4. A, B, and C. Question 8. If we are currently in a liquidity trap, remember where your money supply curve intersects the money demand curve at the horizontal. Very low interest rates. If we shift money supply around, it does not change the interest rates. There is a high demand for money and a low interest rates. Option 3. Which one of the following can be regarded as a fully exogenous variable in the goods market model, while it has exogenous and endogenous components in the ISLM model? So, investment spending, completely exogenous in the goods market model, but in our ISLM model, we have interest rates on your y-axis, which affects your investment spending. So, exogenous and endogenous components in the ISLM model. A decrease in the budget deficit requires a restrictive fiscal policy or contractionary fiscal policy. Increase in tax, we shift the IS curve to the left. It could have also been a decrease in government expenditure. Question 11. Given the following LM curves, C and D are correct. It would be option 3. Question 12. Contractionary fiscal policy, expansionary monetary policy in the ISLM. Remember, your ISLM has interest rates and output and income. So, what happens to your interest and output and income? Contractionary fiscal policy, we shift the IS curve to the left. Decrease in interest, decrease in output and income. But that's not what they're asking. They're asking what happens to investment spending. Now, investment spending is indeterminate when we talk about our fiscal policy in the ISLM, because Remember, investment is the link between the financial and goods market models. When interest rate decreases, investment spending increases. But when income decreases, investment spending decreases. There is an indeterminate effect on investment spending. For your expansionary monetary policy, we shift the LM curve to the right. We've got a lower level of interest and a higher investment spending. Question 13, within the ISLM model, which of the following actions will bring about a decrease in the level of output and income and an increase in interest rates? Decrease in output and income, increase in the interest rates, contractionary monetary policy. An increase in the rand-dollar exchange rate between South Africa and the US implies that fewer rands must be paid for the dollar, leading to lower exports and a trade deficit. Question 15. Depreciation in the exchange rate has both a positive and negative effect, as we saw earlier. Remember, how does it affect your exports and imports, and how does it affect your import bill? Right? Depreciation reduces the price of exports and increases the price of imports. Question 16. During the first quarter of 2012, interest rates in South Africa were higher than the rest of our major trading partners. Which one of the following is correct? Using the ISLM model for an open economy, which of the following correctly describes the impact of the relatively higher interest rate on the rand-dollar exchange rate and the domestic trade balance? If our interest rate is higher, people are going to switch their investment from foreign currencies into our currency or from their country to ours, causing an appreciation. Exports will decrease, deficit on the trade balance. Question 17, it is 1. Question 18. Positive relationship exists between expected price level and bargained nominal wage. If we expect the prices to increase, we're going to bargain for higher nominal wages. Unemployment rate and nominal wage has a negative relationship. Markup and price, remember, price is just equal to markup over cost, wages. So the higher the markup, the higher the price. Nominal wage and price per unit, like we said, price is just the markup over the nominal wage. Better unemployment benefits and the nominal wage. It increases the bargaining power of labor and they can bargain for higher nominal wages. So it is number 4. A movement from point C to point B indicates that the unemployment rate has decreased. No. Yeah. Unemployment rate has decreased and the actual price level is higher, B and D. Right, and question 20. Which one of the following statements is correct? Contractionary fiscal policy, contractionary monetary policy in the ADAS graph. Both of those would have shifted the money demand, not the money demand, the aggregate demand curve to the left. Okay? And it would be option 5. Demand for money is lower since the level of output and income is lower. Real money supply is lower since the nominal money supply is lower. All right, any questions?